You've been doing it for decades, and it might be the one habit keeping your blood sugar high every single morning. Not sugar, not food, just that first cup of coffee you drink before anything else, the one you trust. So why are your numbers still rising? And what is that cup actually doing inside your body right now? If you're serious about taking better care of your health, make sure you subscribe. I share simple, practical advice designed especially for seniors. And feel free to leave a comment telling me where you're watching from. I always read them and appreciate every one of you. Let's get back to it. Picture this. It's 6:47 in the morning. The bedroom is still dim. The house is quiet. And before the feet even fully find the floor, before water, before food, before a single conscious decision is made, the hand is already reaching for the coffee maker. It's not a choice anymore. It's a reflex. And for most seniors, it has been for 30, 40, maybe 50 years. There's nothing wrong with that picture on the surface. Coffee is comforting. Coffee is familiar. And if you've been told it's actually good for you, well, there's real science behind that. A major analysis published in Diabetes Care, drawing from large population studies across multiple countries, found that regular coffee drinkers had a measurably lower risk of developing type 2 diabetes compared to those who didn't drink it. So you kept drinking it, faithfully, every morning, and yet something isn't adding up, because sitting in doctors' offices across the country, there are seniors with fasting glucose numbers that won't come down, people who watch what they eat, people who walk, people who care about their health and show up for their appointments and do what they're told, and their blood sugar is still creeping in the wrong direction. How does that happen? How does something that protects against diabetes become part of a pattern that quietly works against you? That question is exactly what brought me here today. My name is Dr. James Cross. Over the years, I've worked closely with hundreds of patients over the age of 60, managing blood sugar issues, some newly diagnosed, some fighting a losing battle for years. And after a while, I stopped looking only at what people were eating. I started looking at everything: the timing of meals, sleep quality, stress patterns, and then the morning routine. What I found, again and again, wasn't some exotic mistake. It wasn't a dangerous supplement or a hidden diagnosis. It was something so ordinary, so deeply woven into the start of every single day, that nobody, not the patient, not their family, sometimes not even their doctor, had ever thought to question it. It was the coffee. Not the coffee itself, let me be clear about that, but the way it was being used, the when, the what went into it, the how many times a day, the pattern built around a cup that started out innocent and somewhere, over time, became a metabolic disruption hiding in plain sight. Here's what I want you to understand before we go any further. Your body after 60 is not the same body that built this habit at 35. The rules have changed, the chemistry has changed, and the same morning ritual that felt harmless for decades may now be sending your blood sugar in a direction you never intended. A small shift, not a dramatic one, can change all of that. And that's exactly what I'm going to show you. Let's start with something nobody tells you when you turn 60. Your body didn't get weaker, it got more sensitive. And there's a very important difference between those two things, because one means you're declining, and the other means you need to start paying closer attention to signals you could afford to ignore before. Think about it this way. At 35, your body had a kind of metabolic buffer. You could skip a meal, stay up late, drink coffee on an empty stomach, and bounce back without much consequence. The system was forgiving, flexible. It absorbed the small daily insults and kept moving. That buffer shrinks with age, not because something is broken, but because the machinery running in the background has changed. And 3 of those changes matter more than almost anything else when it comes to blood sugar and how your morning coffee now lands. The first change is insulin sensitivity. As the body ages, the cells that once responded quickly and efficiently to insulin begin to slow down. They don't open as readily. Glucose lingers in the bloodstream longer than it should. Research in endocrinology has consistently shown that insulin resistance increases with age, even in people who aren't diabetic, even in people who exercise and eat well. It's not a personal failure, it's biology, but it does mean your body is now working with less margin for error. The second change is muscle mass. This one surprises people. Muscle is the body's single largest site of glucose disposal. When your muscles contract, even during a short walk, they pull glucose out of the bloodstream and use it for energy. The more muscle you carry, the more efficiently your body clears glucose after a meal or a spike. After 60, muscle mass begins to decline at a rate of roughly 1 to 2% per year, a process called sarcopenia. Less muscle means less glucose uptake, which means spikes last longer and hit harder than they used to. The third change is hormonal rhythm. Cortisol, the stress hormone that also governs your natural wake cycle, follows a predictable daily pattern. It peaks in the early morning to give you the energy to start your day. In younger adults, this peak is sharp and controlled. In older adults, that rhythm becomes less stable. Cortisol can run higher, linger longer, and respond more dramatically to stimulants. Which brings us directly back to the coffee. Because when you combine an already elevated morning cortisol with a shot of caffeine on an empty stomach, before food, before water, before anything, you're not just waking up your brain. You're amplifying a hormonal signal that is already primed to release glucose into your bloodstream. The result is a blood sugar spike that was never caused by food. It was caused by a habit that made perfect sense at 40, and quietly stopped making sense somewhere along the way. So now you understand what's happening inside the body after 60. The insulin sensitivity is lower, the muscle mass is reduced, the hormonal rhythms are less stable, and every single morning, before most seniors have eaten a single bite of food, they pour caffeine directly into that system. Let's talk about what happens next. Not in vague terms, not in medical jargon that glazes the eyes, but in plain, honest language that makes the mechanism impossible to ignore. It starts before you even open your eyes. Somewhere between 6 and 8 in the morning, depending on your sleep schedule, your brain triggers a release of cortisol. This is completely natural. It's called the cortisol awakening response, and its entire purpose is to prepare your body for the demands of the day ahead. Part of how it does that is by signaling the liver. The liver responds by releasing stored glucose into the bloodstream, not because you ate anything, not because your body needs fuel from food yet, but because cortisol is essentially telling every system in your body, wake up, energy is needed, get ready. Blood sugar rises, gently, naturally, as part of a process your body has been running your entire life. Now add coffee. Caffeine works by blocking adenosine receptors in the brain, the receptors responsible for making you feel drowsy. But that's only part of the story. What most people don't realize is that caffeine also triggers a release of adrenaline and other catecholamines, the same stress response hormones your body produces when it perceives a threat. Research published in findings consistent with the British Journal of Nutrition has shown that caffeine consumed during the morning fasting window can significantly amplify glucose release, particularly in older adults whose cortisol response is already less regulated. In simple terms, cortisol opens the door. Caffeine kicks it off the hinges. The liver, now receiving two separate signals to release glucose, one from cortisol, one from the adrenaline surge triggered by caffeine, responds accordingly. Blood sugar climbs. And here's the part that makes this so frustrating for so many people. You haven't eaten anything yet. No bread, no sugar, no processed food. Nothing that anyone would look at and say, there's the problem. Just a cup of coffee. The same cup that research says lowers diabetes risk in the long run. The same cup you've been drinking your whole life. But the timing has turned it into something else entirely. Think of it like this. Imagine your body's hormonal system first thing in the morning is an engine sitting at idle, already running, already warm, cortisol having done its job of getting things moving. Now imagine someone pressing the accelerator to the floor before the car has even pulled out of the driveway. That's what caffeine on an empty stomach does to blood sugar after 60. The engine wasn't broken. The car was fine. But the pressure applied at the wrong moment, before the system was balanced, before food had given the body something real to work with, creates a surge that the body now has to spend the next several hours correcting. And while it's doing that correcting, you may feel an energy crash, increased hunger, brain fog, irritability, all of which push many seniors toward, you guessed it, another cup of coffee. And the cycle starts again. This isn't a character flaw. It isn't carelessness. It's a physiological chain reaction that starts with one small decision made at the wrong moment. And the good news, the genuinely good news, is that it can be interrupted. So we've established the chain reaction. Cortisol rises, caffeine amplifies it, blood sugar spikes before breakfast has even begun. But here's where it gets worse. Because for most seniors, the coffee doesn't arrive black. It arrives with something in it. A spoonful of sugar, a splash of creamer, a flavored powder stirred in at the counter because plain coffee was too bitter, or because the vanilla one just tastes better in the morning, or because switching to artificial sweetener felt like the responsible, health-conscious choice. And that last one, the artificial sweetener, is where the story takes a turn most people never see coming. Let's work through each addition honestly. Sugar first. This one isn't surprising. A teaspoon of table sugar added to morning coffee delivers a direct hit of glucose and fructose into a bloodstream that is already elevated from the cortisol-caffeine collision we just described. You're not just starting from zero and spiking upward. You're spiking from an already elevated baseline. The pancreas scrambles to produce insulin. The body lurches into damage control mode, all before 7 in the morning. But most people already know sugar isn't ideal, so they made the switch. They chose artificial sweeteners instead. And this is where it gets quietly complicated. A landmark study published in Nature found that certain artificial sweeteners, including saccharin and sucralose, altered the composition of gut bacteria in ways that actually impaired glucose tolerance in some individuals. Not in everyone, but in a measurable, reproducible pattern that the researchers found significant enough to warrant serious attention. What that means in plain language is this. You removed the sugar, but your gut microbiome, which plays a direct role in how your body processes and responds to glucose, may have been disrupted in the process. The sweetness signal arrives. The body prepares for incoming glucose. The glucose never comes. And over time, that mismatch may blunt the body's ability to regulate blood sugar effectively. You thought you were making the safer choice. The biology tells a more complicated story. And then there are the creamers. Flavored liquid creamers, the ones that make coffee taste like dessert, are among the most quietly damaging additions in a senior's morning routine. A single serving contains a mixture of hydrogenated oils, added sugars or corn syrup, and artificial flavorings. Most people use 2 or 3 servings without measuring. The carbohydrate load is real. The effect on blood sugar is real. But the label says sugar-free, so it feels safe. It isn't. Here's the reframe that changes everything. By the time most seniors finish their morning coffee, they haven't just consumed a beverage. They've consumed a glucose trigger, dressed up in comfort, disguised as routine, and reinforced by decades of habit. The cup that was supposed to protect them has been quietly modified, morning by morning, into something their metabolism was never designed to handle at that hour. And the solution isn't to fear the coffee. It's to understand what you're actually putting into it. So let's take stock of where we are. The morning cortisol spike is real. The caffeine amplification is real. The hidden damage inside the cup, the sugar, the sweeteners, the creamers, is real. And if you've been sitting with this information feeling like coffee is simply the enemy, I want to stop you right there. Because that's not the conclusion. Not even close. Here's what makes this topic genuinely fascinating, and what separates the people who use coffee intelligently from the ones who suffer its consequences without ever understanding why. Coffee, used at the right moment, doesn't just avoid harm, it actively helps. And the difference between harmful and helpful isn't the coffee itself. It isn't the brand, the roast, or the brewing method. It's entirely about when it lands in the body. Let me explain the science behind that, because once you understand it, the logic becomes impossible to argue with. Coffee contains a compound called chlorogenic acid. It's one of the primary reasons population studies consistently link coffee consumption to reduce diabetes risk. What chlorogenic acid does, specifically, is slow the rate at which glucose is absorbed through the intestinal wall after a meal. Think about what that means. When you eat, particularly carbohydrates, glucose enters the bloodstream in a wave. The size of that wave and how quickly it peaks determines how hard the pancreas has to work and how dramatically blood sugar rises. Chlorogenic acid essentially puts a brake on that process. It smooths the wave. It slows the absorption. It gives the body more time to respond without being overwhelmed. A review of clinical studies published in Findings Consistent with the Journal of Nutritional Biochemistry confirmed that coffee consumed around mealtimes, particularly before or shortly after eating, showed meaningful improvements in postprandial glucose response in older adults. Postprandial simply means after eating, and this is where timing becomes the entire conversation. Drink coffee before your body has food to work with, on an empty, fasted stomach, and you get the cortisol collision, the adrenaline surge, the glucose spike with nothing to buffer it. Drink coffee at the right window around a meal, and those same compounds that were causing chaos start doing something completely different. They slow glucose absorption. They moderate the spike. They work with your metabolism instead of against it. Same coffee, same body, entirely different outcome. This is what researchers refer to when they discuss metabolic windows. Specific periods during the day when the body's hormonal and digestive state makes it particularly receptive to certain inputs. Coffee isn't unique in this regard. Exercise, protein, even hydration all behave differently depending on where they fall in the body's daily rhythm. But coffee is one of the most powerful examples of this principle, precisely because so many people consume it at the worst possible window without realizing there's a better one available. There's one more timing factor that doesn't get nearly enough attention: evening coffee. Even a cup consumed at 4 or 5 in the afternoon can delay sleep onset and reduce sleep quality in adults over 60, whose caffeine metabolism has already slowed with age. And poor sleep, as research published in The Lancet has consistently shown, directly impairs insulin sensitivity the following morning. So the evening cup isn't just a sleep problem. It's a blood sugar problem that shows up the next day, quietly, invisibly, in the fasting glucose reading your doctor pulls at your next visit. The pattern connects in ways most people never trace, but now you can. And once you can see it, once timing stops being invisible, everything about how you use coffee starts to shift. I want to tell you about a man I'll call Mr. Gerald, 72 years old, retired electrical engineer, the kind of man who approached his health the same way he approached his career, methodically, precisely, with spreadsheets involved. He tracked his meals, he logged his steps, he attended every follow-up appointment without being reminded. If discipline alone could fix a blood sugar problem, Gerald would have fixed his years ago. But his fasting glucose remained stubbornly, frustratingly elevated. His previous doctor had nudged his medication upward twice in 3 years. Gerald accepted it without complaint, but privately, it bothered him deeply. He wasn't the kind of man who liked the idea of needing more of something when he felt like he was already doing everything right. When he first came to see me, he handed me a printed log: meals, times, portion sizes, exercise duration, sleep hours. I looked through it carefully, and on the surface, he was right. There wasn't much to criticize. The diet was reasonable. The activity was consistent. The sleep was adequate. But I noticed something he hadn't flagged as relevant. At the top of every single morning entry, before breakfast, before water, sometimes as early as 5:45 a.m., there it was: coffee, large, 2 sugars replaced with stevia, splash of oat milk creamer. Then another entry around 10 a.m., a second cup alongside a handful of crackers, and a third, noted almost as an afterthought, at 8:30 in the evening while watching television. I asked him how long he'd been drinking coffee this way. He looked at me like the question confused him. "My whole life," he said. That was the moment. Not a dramatic revelation, not a frightening diagnosis, just a quiet recognition that the most consistent variable in 40 years of mornings had never once been examined as a possible contributor to the problem he was trying to solve. We didn't change his medication. We didn't overhaul his diet. We made 3 adjustments to his coffee routine: timing, additives, and the evening cup, and asked him to track his fasting glucose for the following 6 weeks, the same disciplined way he tracked everything else. At his next visit, he placed a new printed log on the desk without saying a word. The numbers had moved. Not overnight, not dramatically, but steadily, consistently, in the right direction. The kind of movement that looked less like luck and more like cause and effect. Gerald sat back in his chair and said something I've thought about many times since. I spent 3 years looking for the complicated answer. It turned out the complicated answer was hiding inside the simple habit. That's the nature of patterns. They're invisible precisely because they're ordinary, because they've been present so long that the mind stops registering them as variables at all. Gerald's story isn't unique. It's a version of what I've seen repeated in different kitchens and different routines, more times than I can count. And the shift that changed things for him, the actual practical method, is exactly what we're going to cover next. Gerald's story didn't end with an observation. It ended with a system. And that system, refined across dozens of patients, tested against real fasting glucose numbers, adjusted for the specific physiological realities of the body after 60, is exactly what I want to hand you right now. Not a restriction, not a elimination, a method. Because the goal was never to take coffee away. The goal was always to understand it well enough to use it correctly. And correct use comes down to 3 specific moments, 3 windows in the day where coffee stops being a metabolic disruption and starts becoming a genuine tool for blood sugar stability. Moment 1, delay the first cup. This is the adjustment that moves the needle fastest for most people. Instead of reaching for coffee the moment your feet hit the floor, give your body a 45 to 60-minute window first. Drink water, eat something with protein, eggs, plain yogurt, a small handful of nuts, cottage cheese. Let the cortisol awakening response complete its natural arc, without caffeine amplifying it into a spike. By the time you have your first cup, your blood sugar is stabilized, your cortisol is already descending from its morning peak, and the caffeine lands in a body that is balanced and fed, not fasted and hormonally primed for a glucose surge. The same coffee, a completely different physiological outcome. Moment 2. Use coffee before your main meal. Chlorogenic acid, the compound we discussed earlier, is most effective when it has a meal to work with. Having your second cup approximately 20 to 30 minutes before lunch or your largest meal of the day allows those compounds to begin moderating glucose absorption before the food even arrives. Research supporting postprandial glucose modulation consistently shows this window produces the most measurable benefit from coffee's natural compounds. You're not fighting your metabolism, you're timing your inputs to work with it. Moment 3, after light movement. If you walk, even a short 10 to 15-minute walk after a meal, your muscles are actively pulling glucose out of the bloodstream independently of insulin. Studies published in Findings Consistent with Diabetes Care confirm that post-meal walking significantly reduces glucose spikes in older adults. Having coffee after that walk extends the benefit. The muscles are primed, the glucose uptake window is open, and the stimulating effect of caffeine, landing after movement rather than before food, supports energy without triggering the stress response cascade. 3 moments, 3 intentional decisions. And alongside the timing, keep the cup clean. Plain coffee, or as close to it as possible. If something must be added, choose wisely and measure it honestly. This isn't about perfection, it's about pattern. Because what Gerald understood, what changed his numbers and his mornings, wasn't a dramatic intervention. It was the quiet power of doing one ordinary thing at the right time, consistently, with intention. That's the method. Simple, sustainable, and for the body after 60, genuinely powerful. The method works. But I want to be honest with you about something before we close, because I think you deserve the full picture, not just the part that fits neatly into a single video. Coffee timing is powerful. The 3 moments we just walked through are real, evidence-backed adjustments that have moved numbers for real people in real life. But coffee alone is not the system. It's one instrument in an orchestra. And an orchestra with only one instrument playing correctly still doesn't sound the way it's supposed to. Here's what the complete picture looks like. The first element is smart coffee use. You already have that. The delay, the pre-meal window, the post-movement cup. The clean ingredients. The eliminated evening disruption. That piece is now yours. The second element is movement, and it doesn't have to be dramatic. A 10 to 15-minute walk after meals is not a workout. It's not a fitness program. But research published consistently across metabolic health literature confirms that brief post-meal walking reduces blood sugar spikes in older adults more effectively than longer exercise performed at the wrong time. The muscle is the key. Every step activates it. Every activation pulls glucose out of the bloodstream. And for a body whose insulin sensitivity has declined with age, whose natural glucose disposal system is running at reduced capacity, that activation becomes genuinely significant. You don't need a gym, you need a habit. The third element is protein, specifically at breakfast. Protein at the first meal of the day does two things that matter deeply for blood sugar. It slows gastric emptying, meaning food moves more slowly from the stomach into the intestine, moderating the glucose wave that follows. And it preserves muscle mass over time, protecting the very glucose disposal system that aging is quietly eroding. Eggs, Greek yogurt, cottage cheese, legumes. Simple, accessible, affordable. Not a supplement protocol. Not an expensive intervention. Just a deliberate choice made once, at the start of the day, that compounds quietly over weeks and months into measurable protection. These three elements together, timed coffee, daily movement, protein-anchored meals, form something the body responds to not as separate inputs, but as a coherent rhythm, a signal it can organize itself around. And this matters because your body was never the problem. It was never broken, never failing, never beyond reach. It was always responding, faithfully, precisely, to whatever signals it was given. The cortisol, the caffeine, the sweeteners, the late evening cup. It processed every one of them exactly as it was designed to. The only question was whether those signals were working for you or against you. Now you know the difference. Now the morning looks different. The cup means something different. The ritual that has lived in your kitchen for decades can finally start earning its place. Your body is always listening. The only question that remains is a simple one. Starting tomorrow morning, what are you going to tell it? Thanks for watching all the way through. Staying informed is key to living a healthier, longer life. If you want more simple, practical health advice, make sure you subscribe and tap the next video on your screen. And before you go, leave a comment and rate this from 1 to 10. Your feedback helps me create better guidance for you.